Today we have Albert Thompson, who's the Managing Director of Digital Innovation at Walton Isaacson, and he's going to share why the Metaverse is a particular draw for multicultural consumers and how brands can activate community in the next frontier of virtual connectivity.
So Albert Thompson, Managing Director of Digital Innovation at Walton Isaacson, and my task really to the agency is to be a marketing technologist. In layman's terms, that means that for whatever marketing solve is, to understand technology's role in participating in that, whether it is to accelerate it, it is to essentially break it down, whether it's to discover, whether it's to glean new insights, new understanding, what have you. However, marketing takes that role, or if marketing has to be mapped on top of technology. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, this presentation, why the Metaverse for multicultural audiences, really gets into the consumer psychology behind the draw as to why this frontier will be big for culture, in particular multicultural audiences, but the idea of it, and I'm gonna explain to you why. So let's sort of get into what is the Metaverse, and I know in the Marriott presentation there was some definitions around it, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and some of those things I'll reflect as well. But when you start to look at this notion of an embodied internet, we as human beings have always been somewhat an embodiment, whether it's of ourselves, our aspirational selves, or whether we're just trying to mimic somebody else. You hear the idea that people wanted to feel like Air Jordan, or as they used to say, they're gonna get on the golf course and harness their inner Tiger Woo. But we as people, human beings, have always been embodiments of something, and the Metaverse is very much about that. That's why it's gonna be powerful. When you think about the idea of multicultural and culture, you can understand why it's so important and powerful to participate in a space or environments where you feel the environment of who you are and your identity. So, who are communities of color? Well, we know that there's a massive influence that the community of colors have on culture in this country, and that hasn't changed. We see that when we look at things in terms of TikTok challenges, things we've seen in social media that sort of play out in terms of memes, even all the way down from things like BLM. We started to understand that how cultures fuel the culture. So, the Metaverse is very much about that. Strong roots in culture and entertainment. I'm gonna underscore the entertainment because look, the parent company of the Metaverse is gaming. Look at it like that. So you have the Metaverse, esports, casual gaming, hardcore gaming, competitive gaming, the Metaverse as well. So when you think about that, the fact that multicultural consumers are very heavy into entertainment, and that's everything from award shows to TV shows to concerts to sporting events. I mean, if you look around you in these venues, who do you see? You see a very culturally rich audience. So when you think about the fact of what the Metaverse is gonna deliver upon, you can understand why multicultural audiences gravitate towards it. Roots and experiential. By show of hands, how many people in the room touch experiential in some way or manner? Okay. I have a plug for you at the last slide. You are missing from this business because the Metaverse is an experience. The same way you program a physical space like this venue, you have to program a Metaverse room. Seems pretty simple. But the idea is that if you look at who's out in space, in movie theaters, at concerts, at games, you see a rich multicultural representation. In arenas, it's the same. So when you think about the Metaverse being very experiential, the multicultural consumer largely is a very experiential consumer, high touch, like to see it in the flesh, in persons, while we were suffering during COVID, because I think every culture was pretty much suffering. But understand that the Metaverse is very rooted in experiential. Multicultural consumers are very experiential, so why there's always typically an event strategy for particular multicultural audiences. This notion of worlds, in particular for people who are Black in this country, we've always had to exist in more than one world. There's the corporate world, and there's the world we are when we go to the cookout. So, the Metaverse allows you to play with this idea of identity. I'll get more into that later, but when you think about it, if you've had to exist in different worlds in the real world, how challenging is the Metaverse really gonna be? Not very. So when you start to think about multicultural consumers carrying two identities, being American, or American culture, but still holding their identity of their home country or roots, or subculture, then you find a culture that has to move between multiple cultures very fluidly. And that's why the Metaverse will be seamless for us, because it is what we have always had to do. It's an experiential playground. So everyone's trying to figure out their Metaverse strategy. The great thing about the Metaverse is how it can be this connective tissue, but it's really an experiential playground. Lots of experimentation. And if you think about some of the creative or creativity that's come between inventions, it all comes from a point of friction. Friction is, this doesn't work, we don't have this, we need this and that. But the metaverse allows you to somewhat dream. I'm gonna get into dream state a little bit later. But the idea that it's a playground has immense draw for us as human beings, in particular when there are frictions related to opportunity, where we can go, what we can do. So let's talk about what in real life taught us, because this is a bit of the crux of this consumer psychology. I'm gonna play this clip.
You know, when you demean someone and you interfere with, and you lower their presumed status as far as a very primordial circuit is concerned, you alter the system that regulates their emotions, and they hate that. People hate that more than anything, and it's an unbelievably archaic circuit. You can kind of tell.
The relevancy of this is status. The feminist movement happened because women were deemed of low status. Civil rights happened because the black community was deemed low status. Human beings hate it. We hate it more than anything else. BLM was an outbreak of being deemed low status. Black Lives Matter versus the narrative, it seemed like they mattered less. We hate that. But if there's a universe where everyone is then equal footing, equal opportunity, equal starting point, it carries tremendous power. Much of what ethnic minorities see is that the metaverse represents an opportunity where we will not be deemed in the beginning of low status. Everyone is of high status. As while the discords say, hey, no sexism, no racism, no this. Look, none of the messiness. It won't be tolerated. They've got the rules of engagement right. And the importance of that is really understanding how that disrupts people's willingness to be creative. But when they realize they can go in an environment of equal footing, it accelerates that. Another soundbite.
Then you think, well, what's happened among human beings is the multiplication of the set of possible dominance hierarchies, so it's become very broad. And then you could say, well, what's driving selection now is the ability to be successful across multiple sets of dominance hierarchies. And that accounts, at least in part, for our cognitive flexibility. And so that's really what a human being is. A human being is a creature that has high potential for succeeding across a very wide range of potential human dominance hierarchies. And so that gives us our transformative psyche. That's the niche that we've both produced and occupy.
That's huge when you think about how in real life there are dominance hierarchies in every structure, every organization, government leadership. But in the blockchain, there is no dominance hierarchy because no one controls it. When communities understand that they don't have to adhere to a dominance hierarchy in a new universe, it has massive amounts of appeal. It means equality. So when the metaverse has this notion of resetting the dominance hierarchy because no one control what's essentially underpinning by the blockchain, that's massive in terms of psychology about what opportunity and possibility represents that. And it becomes a different dominance hierarchy, meaning the rules of engagement in the metaverse don't apply to necessarily Web 2, meaning the next Fortune 20 companies could be metaverse companies, essentially, could be blockchain companies. We see this reset of the Fortune 250, every series of decades, half century, and we will see yet it again. So we've yet to even see what the next power players will be, but communities understand that, in particular communities who've been deemed of lower status have had less access. That is immensely powerful. Land covenants, very simple. It's where the deed says you can't sell it to someone who is not X. In particular, this is one from San Diego County. It says you can't sell it to someone who is black. In the metaverse, there are no land covenants. That means they can't be locked out. The possibility of building something. That's huge. No redlining. I'm nestled between Baltimore and DC, where I live in Maryland. It's a thing. It's the beginning of gentrification, as we call it. In the metaverse, there'll be no redlining, deeming districts to be a risk and not worth investing. Versus they end up being suppressed, and they get bought by major developers, and they build a shopping mall or something. That's massive. Again, all these things matter when people start talking about the next frontier, where we'll be going, and the fact that some of the things that have underpinned discriminatory behavior just won't exist, because in the blockchain, you can't redline. So the notion of bias, this is going to be huge. And I cross through advertising because advertising has to understand its role in perpetuating bias. A couple of things. One, I always make this statement that the machines are only good as the people programming them. Let me say this again. The machines are only good as the people who program them. That's why there's bias in almost everything. This is actually an article from the head of marketing of IBM. IBM oversees IBM Watson. If you don't know who Watson is, it's the foremost super powerful artificial intelligence engine that beat some of the foremost poker players in the world. It also beat one of the foremost race car drivers by powering an autonomous car on a racetrack against an actual driver. I know I said a lot, but let's be clear. If that engine says there could be bias, and it's the most powerful one, then there's probably bias in any tech stack. Could be just because the traders aren't very diverse in their buying patterns. So again, when you start to look at the platforms and tool across the ecosystem of marketing, there's always bias. There's bias in recruitment, but advertising has to understand it ends up perpetuating this cycle of bias. But in the metaverse, this just won't be tolerated. And again, this is the notion of what you have to get right before entering the space and the mindset you need to come in with. The metaverse, who are you speaking to? Just look at the two boxes that I highlighted. That's Black and Latino, based upon level of awareness. Let's just put it simple, over 50%. So if you're in the metaverse, who are you really speaking to? By and large, first and foremost, you're probably engaging someone who's Black or Latino first. Those are just the facts statistically. And again, if you looked at gaming, and not gaming on the developer side, the software side, but on the user side, you see a similar sort of pattern and trend. So you have to be aware as you enter the metaverse, you're talking to largely a diverse body of consumers already. You just need to be aware of that to be very intentional in how you engage in. So I had a quiet conversation with this woman, really quiet one. This is on the campus of High Point, so I just took the time for a photo op, but I took meaning into why she would appreciate the metaverse. Not that she would say it was perfect, but this notion of you shouldn't be discriminated in based on race, nationality, religion, or any other thing. But the reality of that is it presents promise where other aspects have failed, where things in real life are so hard-coded they may never change. But the metaverse represents a new frontier for new rules of engagement. So, trust. Because this is really what the ask is of the metaverse. We need better trust. We need a better infrastructure of trust. Ethnic minorities want a better culture of trust because culture is how we identify with ourselves in the world, individually. And when you think about that, you start to think about, well, how does it work? Well, you have to build trust through culture. Brands need to contribute to the culture. So if you're going to move in the metaverse, and I said, hey, by and large, you'll be talking to a multicultural audience. You need to configure how you're going to contribute to the culture, not just figure out how to exploit it and hijack it, which is what advertising does very well. Again, that's that notion that marketing is the parent company. And marketing says the consumer is the only one who's guaranteed to win. So you need to figure out how you're not going to lose. So let's look at this. This is H&M's first metaverse store. I'm an H&M shopper, can't hate. But when you think about the unified experience here, where do you see bias? You don't see sexism. You don't see racism. There's no one following on the floor. You know, there's no man making unseen comments to a woman. There's no someone racially profiling. That's what we want. We want to come in frictionless and understand and accept the experience. So let's get into who will we be, or identity. In this country, in America, people are forced to identify, first as an American, and then you have to assimilate with some particular identity of your subculture, meaning you gotta be white, you gotta be black, you gotta be Latino, and then you gotta take all the stigma that comes with it. You gotta bear the burden of it, not in the metaverse. Look, you could just go in the metaverse and create an avatar that's a totally different looking ethnicity or a different personality altogether. So when you start to think about it, that's why it can be so powerful.
She's the Global Head of Technology and Innovation at AV InBev.
Culture is about identity and exploring identity. This is what subcultures and countercultures have been doing, forever. Brands, really interesting niche brands, that's what they do really well, is they partner up or they define culture. And, I think in the past 5-10 years, and we've seen people start to explore and play with identity in really new and interesting ways. And of course, there's been interesting waves always. You've had, hippie culture, you've got skateboard culture, you've got punk culture, you've got hip hop and R&B, and there's so many interesting things that make us human and, part of communities. And you're starting to see some of this shape up online. But what's really interesting about the metaverse is that it provides this blanket of anonymity. Someone choose that to be how they'd like to appear. And when you're anonymous, I think that gives you the ability to explore lots of things, good and bad, but certainly identity in a way that the real world doesn't permit you to.
Very important premise as it pertains to what the metaverse will allow to explore. Fun story. We were in Huntington Beach vacation with my kids, probably 5 years ago. My kids saw a 40-year-old man on a skateboard. So when she talked about we all this surf culture, punk culture, and I said, you can get away with that in Huntington Beach, be 40 years old on a skateboard. If you're on the East Coast on a skateboard, something went wrong in life. In the metaverse, there's no judgment. You can just do it anyways because you feel like it because this is the venue. There's regionality that sets societal norms of what we are allowed and not allowed to do, air quotes. So this young lady and I had a talk. We live in the same home. And I said, help me understand why you guys identify so much with your virtual identity. And the conversation was like, look, in core development years, what were we doing? We were on the phone, teenage girl. Or we were in COVID. We had a greater development of our identity in devices in a virtual world than we had in real life, partly because we couldn't go out. There will be a lasting impact of that. The Gen-Zennial mindset has a greater identification with their virtual activities than they do their in real life ones. So the metaverse will matter more as a point of discovery, self-awareness, self-acceptance. That is a fact. Very different from us Gen Xers and Boomers. Who we are is who we show up, likely at a bar or some other place or in a venue, in a stadium to game. The younger generation, very, very different. And that's one of the things why we will really be moving, accelerating identity in the metaverse. So what do we get with this identity? Okay, on the far left, that is the LGBTQIA, it's called periodic table. All the different means of identity if you identify queer. If we push the threshold that far, that means everything else in between is fair game. On the right-hand side, you see the notion of the blockchain. We will own our identity in the blockchain. We will not be forced. So what does that mean? Who are we going to show up with? We're going to be the little avatar on the far left. We're going to be just the Oculus guy in plain clothes, but an avatar in the Oculus on the right. We're going to show up in a little Nas X costume. But in the metaverse, we could do all this in one day. Some of this is only acceptable once a year. They call it Halloween. So we've known that certain audiences, let's say people transgender or people like dress up in drag, have done this for real and in person. But obviously you have to go to the right venues, you have to be in the right city, and it can still be polarizing. But in the metaverse, you can do essentially all those things. That is very powerful for ethnic minorities. They have the ability to explore and exploit self-identity in a way that's never been done, that's very accepting, without judgment, and to do it at light speed multiple times in one afternoon. That's very powerful. So let's get into my identity in the metaverse. This is my Decentraland avatar. It's Miami Fashion Week. We've sponsored it, one of our clients, so I showed up like I was going to be at a fashion event. By the way, the outfits were limiting. I like the suit I have on better than that. The one at the bottom right, that's Wonderman. Wonderman's an agency. They have a lot of great research on the metaverse. I showed up like I'm going to an agency business meeting in a suit. That's me in the Oculus. But the whole idea is that this is just me as a Gen Xer, but you can see that I will carry different profiles based on the environments I go into because those are the rules of engagement, or I just feel like it. And they're not all on the same page, so I just got to take what they can give me. But that becomes a very powerful notion as to the exploration of identity and where we will go, and that is a very important basic human insight. It's why women switch up makeup and shoes. I want a different look. That's why they do their hair differently. Us men, we're a little bit more landlocked. We can only work with what we got. But in the metaverse, we can put that hair back on. We can do a mohawk. We can do whatever we want. So upwards and onwards, where are we going? So this guy, you probably heard of him. First statement I love, people are the ultimate brand machines. We went from a notion of powerful countries to powerful companies to powerful people. People still run everything. Technology does not care about your opinions. Yes, we will all get the time of the metaverse wrong, but it's not coming because it's already here. Technology doesn't care what you think. You can figure out how you're going to onboard or be left out. Don't bring your internet thinking to the blockchain. The metaverse is not a website. That's why I had all the experiential people raise their hands, because this world will need experiential people who can program it out the same way the ANA's programmed out this conference. That's what it will be. So, multiculturality in the metaverse. This is an important notion because I sometimes think people don't think that we're there other than there. No, we're actually there.
Welcome to our very first Metaverse Culture Series experience, y'all.
You wait first on one. Here.
Big credit to Meta for this, for holding this virtual session as a roundtable discussion. They have an entire series of it. You'll see it in the reference to the far right. But again, look at what you see. You see Metaverse on the bottom left. So obviously Latino community, LGBTQ Life Center is actually given a rules of engagement of how to show up in the Metaverse. And then obviously Asian cultures, even Asian American, obviously huge, but if you start looking at China and Japan, it's even bigger. It's almost an arms race between the US and China of who's gonna own the Metaverse, per se. So it's an interesting conversation to shape up, but you have to know that the culture that's there building actively, it's just a totally different set of players. They're not an entrepreneur, they're not an Inc. magazine. I went to an Afrotech executive conference, and the people I met that were part of the blockchain, all black, never heard of them, seen them before, very smart. It's a totally different world. So if you're not in the room where you see them, you're in the wrong room. Okay, this is Miami Fashion Week. Quick tutorial. And we've sponsored those both in person for clients. So I show you those examples because Miami Fashion Week is all Latin American fashion designer focused and obviously Afrotech, black geeks and technologists under Blavity. So these were some early purveyors in space in terms of doing this. And obviously these are major conferences and sort of platforms that have a history. But essentially the people are there, it's there. And again, we've known having done it in real life and actually done it virtually to understand the value proposition. But again, for them, it's an extension, but these are very culturally rooted in their focus. So why multicultural and metaverse? We will stay there for everything it can be, essentially that we were told in real life couldn't be or we were not worthy of. It's a very important statement. So when you're a community who's been told, there's no access to this, you don't know about that, you're not inclusive of this, to that, and in the metaverse, it's free reign, then understand just how powerful that is. That's why. So, Complex Land, Complex Con is a sneaker event that Complex does. So we sponsored Complex Land for one of our clients, and here's a quick clip of it. I just wanted to tease it. And then, again, it will also be about cultural collaboration. So, on the left, you have Vice Media's, Viceverse they call it, and Vice is a very culturally rich organization. So while they're not just specifically Black, Latino focused, they do have a cross-cultural focus. And then this is Wonderman Thompson. Let me just show you a clip. The thing about Viceverse, you go in and collaborate with Vice Medias and organizations. So instead of doing that Zoom thing we all hate, or just doing Slack, which is 2D, you can go into Viceverse and meet with them and collaborate on projects. We have a few budding that we're looking at, and the idea is we'll meet in Viceverse and chop it up, similar to the Meta one you saw earlier. And then this is Wonderman Thompson's. This is when you walk into their sort of virtual building. Obviously, between the JWT and Wonderman, I mean, you're talking about an agency that's been around, what, over 100 years? So again, this is what gonna look a collaborative space. Clients may do a meeting there. I don't know yet, but I have gone in as the avatars I showed you before. So, a future unconfined. This is what we're talking about. We're gonna wrap this up. And I'm gonna read some of this. They say that dreams are wish fulfillment, like a movie that plays in your head, but it's voluntary cognition, Jordan Peterson's world. And then the metaverse allows you to elaborate on that, but in conscious thought, meaning you wake up out of the dream, literally or figuratively speaking, and you imagine what is essentially possible in the metaverse. That's very powerful. So the idea is that there are things always thinking in us, always as human beings. The metaverse represents a playground, as I said, an experiential playground where you can play that notion out. So it allows communities of colors to dream, literally. So if you wanted to know Where we will take it, you'd have to get into our dream structure, figuratively and literally. So, in closing, tell yourself this, amongst a few other things I put in the presentation. The metaverse dimensionalizes Zoom, Google Meet, Teams, plus Slack. We already do this stuff, okay? But now I'll be able to sit at a table and laugh with people and not stare into that green dot at the top of the camera. The metaverse digitizes we work. We work as a co-working space. The idea is the next frontier is we'll go co-work in the metaverse, okay? Because really, if you listen to NVIDIA, when they talk about the Omniverse, they talk about how we're gonna build stuff and then go 3D print it. That's really the B2B side where the metaverse is going to go, beyond the entertainment and glitz and branding. And the last one is event marketers. This is actually your world. It is a event marketer meets a digital programmer. It needs a design. It needs an experience design. Otherwise, people are going to throw a lot of money at it, waste a lot of money, and it'll go the way of the QR code, and we'll have to wait for the resurgence of it.
I loved when you were talking about building trust, and I wanted to ask some advice from you on how brands can build trust with multicultural communities in the metaverse, where authenticity and identity might not be who they are in the real world, but the person that they want to be.
Absolutely. I mean, I think part of it is you need to see representation. So Nielsen did a study talking about ethnic minorities in terms of on-screen representation, movies, TV shows, and they did it in a pinwheel. And it's actually, stealing a little bit of thunder, will be part of the Lexus presentation tomorrow. You'll see that it's very limited how we get to see ourselves, very. It's why our strategy for our clients have multidimensionals, because we have to have different archetypes who get to see themselves like that too, not just what's represented on the big screen. The metaverse has an easy opportunity, just based on graphic illustration, to be all-encompassing. Look, Wonderman Thompson could build that room with black art on the wall. Boom. You could put it Latino artists on the wall. Boom. Because when you walk in a building, there's art anyway. Look, those could actually be NFTs that Wonderman could sell, just saying. But those are very simple cues. People of color are looking for the cultural cues. Do you get it? Are you on the level? And we read it very, very fast. The same way that women can walk into a room and tell, is this going to be a chauvinistic environment? Well, it happens at light speed. So design it intentionally. That's when I say that this space needs the experience design. What are the things you want them to pick up on that are not declared, but are very, very omnipresent? And I think that's the most simplistic way of doing it. The other thing is mix it up. If Wonderman Thompson or the vice versa has somebody come meet you as a host, one time it should be a woman, then it should be somebody black, then somebody Latino, then somebody queer. Mix it up. Like, make it look like you have range of thought. It's very simplistic like that, and then people will talk about that.
For sure.
Okay.
Is it okay to handle the metaverse differently than in other platforms and still seem authentic as a brand?
Ooh. Brands have to get into their brand mentality, because there are a series, and I've talked about it before, a series of mentalities competing. There's the founding mentality, who built this company. There's the existing leadership mentality, who are the stewards now. And then there's the consumer mentality. And then there's who we're supposed to be. So you're gonna have 3, maybe 4. Brands really need to identify what their brand mentality is gonna be in the universe, the metaverse. Like, you could be boring offline, because you sell toilet paper, but you could have an amazing personality in the metaverse because you wanna create a new identity that you can't create in physical retail, because the people who own those big boxes aren't gonna allow it anyway. So I think it's very important to really very intentional about what your mentality is going to be and how you're going to engage and interact and be perceived, whether you're staying consistent, creating a new one, or improving upon one you can't fix because you can't change the founding principles of a company that's 70 years old, and the leadership is based in Indiana. But in the metaverse, you need to be as sexy, as hot as someone in Milan, which you could do as long as you stay to your values, but there's nothing wrong with coming off with a different energy. I think people need to look at the metaverse like, we need to be a whole nother vibe. We can stay to ourselves, but let's be a whole nother vibe so people actually come back, because for a Gen Zennial who's gonna set the rules of engagement, that's gonna be the requirement anyway. Check writers have to understand, often you're not the consumer, you're just the check writer.
For sure, put yourself in that shoe.
Yes.
Lots of questions coming in. Let's take the first one from the audience. With the metaverse being built by humans affected by racism, xenophobia, homophobia, who's responsible for regulating?
Wow, great question. I just had this in another presentation forum. I'm searching for the IAB of the metaverse. There needs to be some sort of governing body. Truth. I don't care if the ANA has picked it up. Someone needs to think about that, because I've had conversations with other organizations and everyone's kind of lost because it's a runaway train and no one's thought about governance. I don't care if it's a panel of a series of organizations who do it, but it's necessary because gaming as a parent company didn't get it right. And we saw that even through the series of lawsuits as gaming got to be very big and the metaverse came. It's like, yeah, but the parent company didn't clean up its act. And I think people need to be very intentional. There needs to be a lot of intent around protecting the environment. Is going to be a future of very much what future generations do. But right now, that's very much absent. And I think people are waiting to figure out, is it going to stick and stay? And like I've already proven, it's going to stay. So the regulatory effort needs to start onboarding now and look into behaviors and look at gaming's mistakes.
And I think it was mentioned earlier that we're kind of running before even coming up with a strategy. So taking that step back and saying, what are these rules? How are we going to be safe in this environment? I think that's a great point.
Absolutely.
Next question. Are there, oh, it just switched on me. Do you think that too much metaverse could negatively affect social skills in the real world?
The younger generation doesn't have social skills.
So true.
Let's be clear. I have to force them to shake my hand. And I have told them things like, you do realize if you don't ask for something in this world, you'll never get it. That's how it works. If you can walk in the room and out-articulate people, you'll get exactly what you want. So to a degree, yes, unless it looks like the early example with Meta where people are in an environment talking and laughing because now it has bridged the gap of what we couldn't do physically. That's where we hope it goes. This idea of just having a voyeuristic role in the metaverse doesn't help human development. It actually would send it backwards. But I think it's incumbent upon the environment to establish the rules of engagement of being here. It's okay to just watch, but to participate, maybe it accelerates a dynamic that people haven't seen. But look, there's nothing better than being in a room and reading body language and being able to take cues and develop communication style. So, you know, what the solve is going to be for that, I don't know. That'll be in a class in a near university that'll cost a lot of money.
Exactly. Well, and there's still the screen protector.
Yes.
Of you are not necessarily showing your full self the way you are,
Yes.
and having that protection. So even if you're interacting in a social way in the metaverse, it won't necessarily translate 100% to real life.
Yes. A fun fact, but scary one is people will start to refine their ability to individually catfish people because they can just put on in front and airs of what it is. But look, I did another presentation where I said, look, some of this is only entertainment. You know, hip hop music had a bad reputation for a level of violence, but look, they do it to pay bills, not because they actually went and did it. I mean, Jay-Z talked about a lot of the stuff, but the guy's on yachts all day. So guess what? He said, it's only entertainment. So some of it is people need to take away that these environments have an entertainment factor. You have to have a lens on what is going to be the truth. And look, some of these things are about accelerating in-person contact and communication, and some of them are just a bridge before you get back in person. My hope is that the high-touch nature of the metaverse accelerates people to want to meet each other, not to say, oh, we now don't have to. And look, I think people seeing the equivalent of we're tired of Zoom, Teams, and Slack, so I'll take the alternative, and if that means I gotta go see people, I'd rather do that than screen at that green dot.
For sure, for sure. All right, next question. Are there any verticals that are not fit for the metaverse, like pharma, for example, and are highly regulated industries subject to more lax rules in the metaverse than in real life? I think that goes to your governance point.
Yeah, look, there are industries who probably need to proceed with caution, but the question is, part of it is they're showing up late. If the heavily regulated industry showed up first, banking, finance, pharma, the rules of engagement would come together because they'd literally be on Capitol Hill lobbying saying, we need a 800-page booklet on what can't do to protect ourselves, and then everyone else is covered, basically. The fact that they're coming in late, like they did in social media, means that the rules of engagement don't clean themselves up till they show up really 7 years later. However, if I were looking at pharmaceutical in a context of certain mental health states, and this is a way of screening for clinical trials, I think it's brilliant. I like Meta's commercial where the woman is practicing surgery before doing it on an actual cadaver, because you mess up the cadaver, you gotta get another one. I don't know,
Right.
I don't know if those things are cheap.
Probably not.
So when you look about that, that's better. You know, race car drivers don't get track time anymore. They're simulator geeks. It's why all the race car drivers, you know, don't look like rock stars. They look like mathematicians. This is real talk. But so there is a space where it has real utility if people find it. You know, if you're going to do banking and finance in the metaverse, because the average bank doesn't even have checking hours anymore to walk in, you go into the metaverse and start to learn about wealth management with someone talking to you with some sort of personality and energy. It feels better than calling customer service, which we all hate. So when you think about what it could accelerate, I think there are categories that can come into it now. They just have to think about how they'd want to show up today. They have to look at an evolutionary period. Like, it can solve points of friction right now based on what we lost is FaceTime. We can get to the point of what we really want to do later when the environment is ready for us, or ready for DD Mac to start showing up.
Yeah, well, that's obviously relevant to my industry as well. Question in the audience.
Hey, how you doing? Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Roberts Jr., Digital Marketing Manager for Shoe Carnival. So I've been on the internet, Facebook since Facebook. I actually know Second Life. Second Life is very similar to the Metaverse. The adoption of Second Life, though, hasn't gotten there. And there still is a digital divide in which we do have, and as minorities, it's even more discerning. So how can tech keep up with the digital divide, then keep up with the adoption that people would actually have to get this technology in order to execute on the services too? So I think it's a lot of, I guess, challenges that we have to unpack there, but more or less for me, it's the adoption and the digital divide. What do you think we can do to overcome that?
Great question, love it. The first thing is, the metaverse can't be about reach. You know, I heard a quote, somebody was saying, it might have been Gary Vayner, he was like, look, people are trading reach and where they're focused on dollars there because they feel like reach is going to be future consumption. The reality is 90% of the reach is never going to buy unless you sell toilet paper. But for the most marketers out there, the large people you're in front of are never going to buy you because of bias or preferences. They'll never tell you, and they don't have to. So you have to get into the quality of engagement and exchange that builds a foundation, long-term value, and gives you insight to constantly make your product better. That's the first thing I would say about judgment on scale, because scale is just another word for reach. It just sounds better. The idea on lack of inclusion. I mean, look, I'm not mad at who built a lot of the things in gaming related, or even Second Life, but you could say a large part of the company who built that and the developers, let's say, were Caucasian. You have to be intentional in saying everybody wants to live a second life. And there are certain segments that may do it more repetitively than others. You have to figure that out. Who's got better staying power? Who's got better resilience? And you have to go find them. That's part of the reason you got to open up and be diverse. You don't know where you're going to make your next money. You don't know if the future of your business is going to be someone that didn't build the business. That's okay. I think people have a hard time with saying, well, but this consumer built our company. Yeah, they did, but they're gone. Some of them may have died. Or they just moved on and out above your brand to something more prestigious. So who's going to backfill is this segment. At the end of the day, you're just trying to make money. So I think people are not very intentional about being very inclusive in designing that from the beginning, but also saying we need to cast an inclusive net because we don't know who's going to stay with us.